All right, everybody. In this lecture, we're diving into hemorrhagic stroke management. This is a very different situation from ischemic stroke because now we're dealing with active bleeding inside the brain. That means pressure rises quickly, brain tissue gets compressed, and patients can deteriorate fast. We're going to walk through the major types of hemorrhagic stroke, what causes them, the critical warning signs nurses cannot miss, and the complications that make these patients so unstable in the ICU setting. We'll also cover aneurysm precautions, vasospasm, hydrocephalus, seizure risk, blood pressure management, and the nursing interventions that truly protect cerebral perfusion and prevent secondary injury. The big picture here is simple. Early recognition, meticulous monitoring, and preventing rebleeding can literally save brain tissue and save lives. Before we get into specific hemorrhagic stroke types, let's quickly orient ourselves to where the bleeding can actually occur. Zone 1 is bleeding directly into the brain tissue itself. That's what we see with intracerebral hemorrhage. Zone 2 involves the ventricles, which are the fluid-filled spaces inside the brain. Blood in the ventricles can obstruct CSF flow and rapidly increase intracranial pressure. And Zone 3 is the subarachnoid space, which is the area between the brain and the surrounding meninges. That's where subarachnoid hemorrhages occur, often from a ruptured aneurysm. Now, clinically, hemorrhagic strokes tend to be more unstable and more life-threatening than ischemic strokes because bleeding expands, pressure rises, and herniation risk becomes very real. These patients can decline quickly, so frequent neurochecks, airway monitoring, blood pressure control, and recognizing subtle deterioration early become absolutely critical at the bedside. Now let's compare the two major hemorrhagic stroke categories you'll see clinically. First is intracerebral hemorrhage, or ICH. This is bleeding directly into the brain tissue itself, and it makes up the majority of hemorrhagic strokes. The biggest driver here is uncontrolled hypertension. Over time, those tiny cerebral vessels become damaged and eventually rupture. You can also see ICH associated with anticoagulants, AVMS, trauma, cocaine use, amphetamines, or cerebral amyloid angiopathy in older adults. On the other side is subarachnoid hemorrhage, or SAH. This usually occurs from a ruptured intracranial aneurysm that leaks blood into the subarachnoid space surrounding the brain. Clinically, these patients often present very differently. ICH patients may have focal deficits that progressively worsen as the bleed expands. SAH patients classically describe a sudden, explosive, worst headache of my life. And one thing nurses always have to remember: both are neurologic emergencies, but SAH patients are especially high risk for vasospasm and rebleeding in the days following the rupture. One of the most important concepts in hemorrhagic stroke care is understanding that deterioration is often subtle at first. A patient may just seem a little more sleepy, slightly confused, or mildly slower to answer questions. That change in level of consciousness is frequently the earliest warning sign that intracranial pressure may be worsening. When you assess the eyes, look for sluggish pupils, unequal pupils, or visual complaints. Cranial nerve involvement can show up as ptosis, facial droop, or extraocular movement deficits. Head and neck findings are also important, especially in subarachnoid hemorrhage. Severe headache and nuchal rigidity should immediately raise concern for meningeal irritation from blood in the subarachnoid space. And systemically, watch for speech difficulty, weakness, sensory loss, or declining motor function. The big nursing takeaway here is this: don't wait for dramatic collapse. Neurodecline usually whispers before it screams. Now let's talk about surgical intervention in intracerebral hemorrhage, because this is an area students sometimes misunderstand. Most primary intracerebral hemorrhages are actually managed medically, not surgically. Just because blood is present in the brain does not automatically mean the patient goes straight to the OR. Surgery is usually considered when the patient is deteriorating neurologically, when intracranial pressure is becoming dangerous, or when there is brainstem compression, especially with cerebellar hemorrhages. That cerebellar bleed is important to remember because swelling in that small posterior space can rapidly compress the brainstem and become life-threatening very quickly. If those surgical indications are met, neurosurgery may perform a craniotomy or use minimally invasive evacuation techniques to remove the hematoma and reduce pressure. From a nursing perspective, your neuro assessments are critical here. The bedside nurse is often the first person to recognize worsening LOC, increasing headache, pupillary changes, vomiting, or declining motor response. Those changes can be the trigger that moves the patient from medical management to surgical intervention. Now let's move into aneurysm management strategies, especially with subarachnoid hemorrhage. The primary goal is simple: prevent the aneurysm from bleeding again. Rebleeding is one of the biggest dangers in these patients and can be rapidly fatal. One classic treatment is surgical clipping. That's where a neurosurgeon places a mechanical clip across the neck of the aneurysm to isolate it from circulation. Think of it like shutting off the weak ballooned area from blood flow. Another major approach is endovascular coiling. Instead of open brain surgery, the provider threads catheters through the vascular system and packs the aneurysm with tiny coils. Those coils promote clotting inside the aneurysm and reduce rupture risk. You may also hear about flow diversion devices. These are stent-like implants that redirect blood flow away from the aneurysm, so pressure decreases over time. And in some situations, vessel wrapping or reinforcement techniques may be used to help stabilize fragile vessel walls. The important thing clinically is understanding that treatment selection depends on the aneurysm's size, location, shape, and the patient's anatomy and stability. From the nursing side, after these procedures, close neuromonitoring is everything. You're watching for vasospasm, rebleeding, worsening LOC, sudden headache changes, or signs of increased ICP. These patients can change very quickly, even after the aneurysm has been secured. Now let's talk about post-operative complications after hemorrhagic stroke interventions, because treatment does not mean the danger is over. In many ways, this is where some of the most intensive monitoring begins. First, we can see cognitive complications. Patients may become disoriented, confused, or develop memory problems. Some patients experience significant amnesia or severe cognitive dysfunction, depending on the bleed location and degree of injury. Next are procedural and surgical risks. During or after aneurysm repair, there is risk for embolization, vessel occlusion, or even recurrent rupture. That is why these patients require extremely close neural monitoring after procedures. Then we have systemic complications. Hemorrhagic stroke patients can develop major fluid and electrolyte disturbances, especially related to hypothalamic or pituitary dysfunction. Sodium abnormalities are very common and can become dangerous quickly. You can also see GI bleeding, hematoma formation, allergic reactions to contrast dye or medications, and, unfortunately, recurrent stroke. From a nursing perspective, this is why trending matters so much. One isolated blood pressure or one slightly abnormal neurocheck may not seem dramatic alone, but patterns tell the story. You are constantly asking yourself, is the patient more confused? Are they more drowsy? Is the sodium dropping? Is the headache worsening? Are they becoming less responsive? These patients can decline fast, and early recognition is one of the biggest things that changes outcomes. Let's simplify this into the nursing care cycle. Assess, identify the problem, and plan the intervention. Then repeat constantly. In hemorrhagic stroke, one of the biggest priorities is protecting cerebral perfusion. Bleeding, swelling, and vasospasm can all reduce oxygen delivery to brain tissue very quickly. Another important diagnosis is severe anxiety. These patients are often critically ill, surrounded by alarms, strict precautions, and sudden neurologic changes. Families are overwhelmed too. So our planning goals focus on 3 major things: optimize cerebral tissue perfusion, reduce anxiety, and prevent avoidable complications. That means frequent neurochecks, tight blood pressure management, maintaining oxygenation, watching for worsening LOC, and communicating clearly with both the patient and family throughout the process. Now let's talk about active monitoring, because these patients require extremely close observation. In the ICU setting, you are trending neurostatus constantly. We're monitoring blood pressure, pulse, level of consciousness, pupils, and motor function very closely, sometimes every hour, or even more frequently depending on stability. And remember, in hemorrhagic stroke, subtle changes matter. A slightly lower GCS, new drowsiness, worsening headache, unequal pupils, or declining strength may be the first sign of deterioration. You are also watching carefully for recurrent bleeding, increasing intracranial pressure, and vasospasm. Those are major complications that can rapidly worsen outcomes. The other big concept here is oxygenation. Hypoxia increases cerebral injury risk. If oxygen delivery drops, the brain becomes even more vulnerable to infarction and secondary damage. That is why respiratory monitoring is so important. Airway protection, oxygen saturation, breathing pattern, and respiratory effort are not secondary concerns in neuro patients. They are directly connected to brain survival. Now let's look at the nursing environment and supportive care setup for hemorrhagic stroke patients. These patients need a calm, low-stimulation environment. Dim lighting and reduced noise can help manage headache, photophobia, and neurologic stress. Head-of-bed positioning is also extremely important. We usually keep the HOB elevated about 30 to 45 degrees to help promote venous drainage and reduce intracranial pressure. You also want to avoid anything that spikes pressure in the head. That means no excessive neck flexion or rotation, no jugular compression, and avoiding straining activities. This is why stool softeners are commonly ordered. Even something like a Valsalva maneuver during constipation can increase intracranial pressure. Sneezing, forceful coughing, and pushing up aggressively in bed can also be problematic. And don't forget DVT prevention. These patients are often immobile, so sequential compression devices, anticoagulation when appropriate, and frequent leg assessment are important. Watch for redness, warmth, swelling, or tenderness that could suggest clot formation. Two major complications we worry about in hemorrhagic stroke are rebleeding and seizures. First, rebleeding. The highest risk window is often within the first 2 to 12 hours after the hemorrhage. This is extremely dangerous and can cause rapid deterioration. Clinically, you may suddenly see a severe headache, nausea and vomiting, declining LOC, or new neurologic deficits. Sometimes the patient who was talking to you an hour ago suddenly becomes difficult to arouse. If rebleeding is suspected, this becomes an emergency. The patient needs immediate evaluation, repeat imaging, strict blood pressure management, and rapid neurosurgical assessment. Now let's talk seizures. These patients are at high risk because blood is very irritating to brain tissue. Step 1 during a seizure is always airway protection and injury prevention. Protect the patient, maintain oxygenation, and do not try to restrain movements. Then step 2 is medication management as ordered and maintaining seizure precautions continuously. And remember, even subtle twitching, staring spells, or sudden changes in responsiveness in neuro patients can sometimes represent seizure activity. Now let's talk about one of the most feared complications after subarachnoid hemorrhage, and that is vasospasm. Vasospasm usually develops several days after the initial bleed and can significantly reduce cerebral blood flow, leading to delayed cerebral ischemia or even another stroke-like injury. Assessment is critical here. Watch for worsening headache, decreasing responsiveness, new aphasia, confusion, or new weakness or paralysis. A patient who suddenly seems neurologically different should always raise concern. One of the first-line prevention strategies is nimodipine. This calcium channel blocker is routinely used after subarachnoid hemorrhage because it helps reduce the risk of ischemic complications related to vasospasm. Now, historically, you may hear about triple H therapy: hypertension, hypervolemia, and hemodilution. The goal was to improve cerebral perfusion through narrowed vessels. Current practice has evolved, and management is much more individualized now, but you still need to understand the concept because you'll hear it discussed in neurocritical care settings. The big takeaway is this: after a hemorrhagic stroke, patients may initially stabilize, then suddenly worsen days later because of vasospasm. Continuous neuroassessment is absolutely essential. Now let's look at two major complications that can develop after a subarachnoid hemorrhage: hyponatremia and hydrocephalus. Starting with hyponatremia, this is actually very common after SAH. It can occur because of SIADH or cerebral salt wasting syndrome. Either way, sodium levels begin to fall, and that becomes dangerous because low sodium can worsen cerebral edema and even contribute to vasospasm. So nurses have to watch those lab trends closely. Frequent sodium monitoring matters. If sodium continues dropping or stays low, the provider needs to be notified quickly because patients may require hypertonic saline therapy. Now on the other side, we have hydrocephalus. Here, blood obstructs normal CSF circulation, causing fluid to build up inside the ventricles. In the acute phase, patients can rapidly deteriorate with decreased LOC, stupor, or even coma. That situation may require an emergent ventriculostomy drain to relieve pressure. Some patients later develop delayed or chronic hydrocephalus. Those patients may appear more sleepy, confused, or unsteady with walking. In that setting, they may eventually require a VP shunt for long-term CSF diversion. The big picture here is this. Hemorrhagic stroke is not just about the initial bleed. Secondary complications like sodium imbalance and hydrocephalus can become life-threatening if they are not recognized early. Before discharge, families need to understand that recovery from hemorrhagic stroke does not end when the patient leaves the hospital. Education is a huge part of preventing complications and reducing readmissions. Patients and caregivers need to recognize early warning signs like worsening headache, confusion, weakness, seizures, or changes in responsiveness. Those symptoms should never be ignored. Medication adherence is also critical. Blood pressure management, follow-up appointments, and activity restrictions all matter because rebleeding risk can still exist. Home safety is another major focus. Some patients will need mobility modifications, assistive devices, or supervision during recovery. And finally, transitional support matters. These patients often need targeted rehabilitation for mobility, speech, cognition, and self-care retraining. Emotional recovery is important too, because anxiety and fear after a hemorrhagic stroke are extremely common. The big takeaway is this: discharge is really a transition point, not a finish line. Ongoing monitoring, education, rehabilitation, and family support are essential parts of long-term recovery. Let's wrap this lecture up by looking at what successful management of hemorrhagic stroke should ultimately accomplish. First, we want the patient to maintain stable neurological status and stable vital signs. That means no worsening LOC, no new deficits, controlled blood pressure, and preserved cerebral perfusion. Second, we want to reduce anxiety for both the patient and the family. Hemorrhagic stroke is frightening, and clear communication and education are a major part of quality care. Third, our goal is prevention of major complications. We spent a lot of time discussing vasospasm, seizures, rebleeding, hydrocephalus, and hyponatremia because these complications can dramatically worsen outcomes if they are not recognized early. And finally, before discharge, patients and families need to understand safety precautions, medication adherence, follow-up care, and when to seek emergency help. The major takeaway from this entire lecture is this: hemorrhagic stroke is a true neurocritical emergency. Early recognition, aggressive monitoring, rapid intervention, and strong interdisciplinary care can significantly improve survival and long-term recovery. Let's finish with the biggest nursing priorities to remember with hemorrhagic stroke. First, altered LOC is often the earliest sign of deterioration. Even subtle drowsiness or mild slurred speech matters. Never ignore neuro changes. Second, hemorrhagic stroke is highly unstable. Prevent rebleeding by controlling blood pressure and avoiding anything that spikes intracranial pressure like straining, Valsalva maneuvers, neck flexion, excessive stimulation, or coughing. Keep the head of bed elevated about 30 to 45 degrees and maintain a calm, quiet environment. Watch closely for vasospasm, especially after subarachnoid hemorrhage. Worsening headache, decreased responsiveness, or new deficits are red flags. Nimodipine is commonly used for prevention. Remember the major complications: rebleeding, vasospasm, seizures, hydrocephalus, and hyponatremia. Continuous neuroassessment and rapid intervention save lives. And finally, families need strong discharge education because recovery continues long after hospitalization. The bottom line: recognize changes early, protect cerebral perfusion, prevent ICP spikes, and never underestimate subtle neurodecline.